strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm so happy that you could be with us today. We are live from Boca Raton, Florida, and we have another wonderful program. This program was designed just for you, a family caregiver. So if you're caring for somebody that has some form of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, or any of the many others out there, this show is for you, to help you along that journey. As you know, it's not easy, and we provide expert advice and lots of wonderful tips and education to help you along the way so that your journey would be a little bit better and the person that you're caring for the same. So today we have a topic that we've only touched on in the past, but we're going to delve into it a lot further today. And that topic is caregiving and the church. Now, we know there are a lot of resources out there, community-based resources, for people to go to support groups, to get advice, to get some education, a lot of research centers, a lot of resource centers in different communities. But what about the church? The church is a faith-based community, and because it can be such a large part of a caregiver's life and also a large part of the person they're caring for's life, it makes sense to talk about that. So today, my special guest is Dr. Kate McCarty. Now, Dr. Kate, she has her PhD in aging studies, her master's degree in thanatology. She was a licensed ministerial candidate in her church. She was a nurse's aide, and she was an activity director for nursing homes. So all of that experience, and not only did she have this professional education, this professional experience, she also has, unfortunately, a lot of family and personal experience with caregiving. So we're going to talk to Dr. Kate. She is calling in from her home on the west coast of Florida. So let's bring her on now. Dr. Kate, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon or evening, Marcia. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm very excited that you're here.
Thank you. It's exciting that you read the book.
I did read it. Matter of fact, I want to let everybody know that this is one of a couple of books that you've written. You were here with us about, a year or two ago, where we talked about Feathering Your Nest, one of the other books that you wrote for caregivers. But the book that we'd like to talk about today is actually called Graceful Alzheimer's Care. I have it here with me in the studio, showing it on the screen for those that are watching us on the video. And Graceful Alzheimer's Care is actually the church's call to action. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let me just start off with asking you right off the top, Dr. Kate, why write a book where you're asking the church to take action? Do you think that it doesn't exist, there's not enough of it? Have you seen any examples? Why did you write this book?
Oh, absolutely. And we may be improving. I recently saw another book come out about dementia-friendly faith activity, which is great. But in general, in everyday life when I'm coaching people, they have slipped away from the church, or more, let's just say more aggressively, the church has not met their needs, so they have kind of retracted. And what's really sad is that these are the pillars of the church. These are the folks that were like the founding fathers. I spoke with a fellow today in a coaching session, and the question was, what are the highs and lows of aging? And he has a wife with Alzheimer's, and he said the high was when I was very pivotal as a leader of my church and of work. He said, I don't miss being a leader at work, but I really miss. He said, I've become peripheral to the church. He no longer is a part of it. The music has moved on. His wife, the person with Alzheimer's, was the leader of shut-in ministry. He said there is no shut-in ministry. There's no prayer requests anymore. The churches of which they have been part of are now like really big box store, is how he describes them. And he feels very lost. And that's a recurring theme. My passion comes from the first person I've ever worked with Alzheimer's was my first father-in-law, and this is back in the early 90s, late 80s, and he had gone to Mass every day of his life since a small child at 6 a.m. Morning Mass was how he was programmed. He had been the leader of the parish council. He had done just a pillar of the church, tither, very pivotal in so many of the financial decisions and very pivotal in the financial support of the church. But he had this incident, and it wasn't so much the church leadership in this case as it was perhaps my mother-in-law, but he forgot what to do with the host. And this is a Catholic person, and in the Catholic Church, that's very significant, particularly the old Catholics, that transubstantiation, this is the body of Christ. Well, he put it in his pocket.
He took the little wafer, instead of putting it in his mouth, he put it in his
He
pocket.
put it in his pocket, which was very innocent. And I've been many things. I'm very ecumenical. I've been Catholic. I've been Protestant. I've done a lot of different things. But I'm pretty sure that God understood that where that came from, that slip, and I'm not sure he would have ever done it again. But on that morning, he put it in his pocket, and that was the last morning that he ever received communion until they placed him in a nursing home, and, we surreptitiously took it in illegally.
Well, Dr. Kate, now, your father-in-law, at that time, he was diagnosed with some form of dementia, right?
He had Alzheimer's, yes.
He had Alzheimer's. And your mother-in-law was taking him to church like they always did every week.
Yes.
And he did this, and she stopped taking him. And was that because someone at the church said something, or was it because she was embarrassed? What exactly happened?
She was embarrassed. It was over for her. And when family members approached the church, the priest, he was okay with that decision.
So
he understood where she was coming from.
Right.
Yeah. So now about once every 6 months, maybe someone would come out and give Dad the Eucharist. But he lost that community.
Right, and that's what we're talking about today, is
yes.
the church, the foundation of someone's being, related to the church. And I also want to just make clear to everyone listening, when we're talking about the church, we are not talking about any one denomination. It is the church. Matter of fact, we can actually, what we're talking about, a lot of what we're talking about can be applied to other faith-based organizations, other groups that have other faiths, like the Jewish faith, because we're going to get into some scripture, and it can relate to both the Old Testament and the New Testament when we're talking about how the church, the temple, the synagogue can actually help caregivers. So just to be clear, not just the church and not just one denomination.
Faith communities, yeah, faith communities as a whole.
Right, right.
They don't know how to deal with this special need.
So, and that's the thing, because a lot of caregivers are finding that they can't leave home to go to church because they can't leave their loved one by themselves anymore because of the dementia. They, like in the case of your mother and father-in-law, they feel embarrassed that someone's going to do something or someone else is going to say something that's inappropriate. They couldn't handle it, so they just stop coming. A lot of reasons why caregivers and those they care for are no longer part of the active body of a church because of Alzheimer's or other form of dementia. So that's what we're talking about today, and why the church should step up, and how the church, more importantly, how the church can step up to help these caregivers. So thank you for being here, because you certainly have so much to offer. Your credentials are so impressive. I just wanted to explain, when I said that you have a degree or a master's degree in thanatology, I wanted to explain that to everybody. Tell us what that is real quick.
That is the study of death and dying. The name is from the Greek god of death, which was Thanos, so it's thanatology. And I went into that because as an activities director in skilled nursing facilities, I spent a lot of time as being the last person at a deathbed, mainly because of regulation, which is good. So I was required 3 times a week to give a person at least 15 hours of appropriate engagement that would enrich their life. And this is at the end of life. So it very much, I became very eclectic. I had the Jewish mission book, and I had the Catholic prayer beads, and I had the Buddhist, and I even had something for Muslim, Hindu. I had to be very eclectic because I knew that these people were at the transition point, and I wanted to be helping them along that way. Usually these were nonverbal people. So it's so important to know what a person's faith base was or is.
Absolutely.
And then the nice thing about federal regulation, very important that the family know what you're presenting as well. But it was a very vital way to engage them and help them along, so that it wasn't a death of torment. It was a peaceful, that old saying, there are no atheists in foxholes. So if I knew a person was an atheist, I would be presenting perhaps waterfall and a hand massage,
and more of a spiritual
and
and
nature,
right,
spiritual thing.
Right,
so it wasn't a matter of trying to convert anybody, but it's certainly a matter of trying to honor that transition. And what the study of thanatology taught me was how unique culture and religion, how each one does something a little different.
Yes.
And so we have to be very honoring of that.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to be talking now some specifics, because your book here, The Graceful Alzheimer's Care, A Church's Call to Action, is actually a Bible study, if you will, a 14-week Bible study that's actually directed toward not just the church leaders, but this could be anybody in a church who wanted to take a lead on this. And it would be for a church member who maybe so desired, who had the call, who had it put upon their heart and had the willingness to help. This is a Bible study and a guide to help the churches know how to help their caregivers that are in their congregation or parish, whatever it might be, which I think is wonderful, because you actually have a step-by-step with Bible verses and stories taken directly from the Bible, and you relate those Bible stories to examples today that caregivers are actually experiencing. And I think it's a really neat perspective that you offer so that the churches and the church members can relate and help put those two together to help the present day problems that are going in the church. So I want to get right into a couple of those, and we're going to discuss them, and then we'll talk about how each of these stories relates to today. And the first one that I wanted to bring up is from Exodus, the Old Testament, Exodus 17, verse 8 through 16. And this is the story of Moses leading the fight against the Amalekites in battle. So briefly describe the scenario here, Dr. Kate, what's happening in this story in Exodus.
It's a huge battle, and Moses' choice, because he was the leader, he is holding up the staff of God, which gets heavy over time. I'm going to really simplify the story. And the battle is raging, and the only way that they're going to win this battle is if the staff of God is held high.
So his hands have to be high up in the air.
Yes, and his arms start to flag, and we've got some beautiful art of this particular piece. I just actually used some recently on a flyer. So his arms start to flag, and Aaron and Hur come up underneath, and they help hold his arms up. So it's a beautiful image of that support that's so needed. And when you're in, I want to flash back to some time we spent some time in St. Thomas, my husband and I, and we always laughed at this one commercial that would come on the radio, and it would say, "When you're in the street fight of your life," and really, when you're up against, when you have a spouse or a mother or a very significant loved one who has dementia, and that those changes are happening before your eyes, it feels like the street fight of your life. It is seriously all-encompassing. So just like this battle was going on, and Moses was the guy with the stutter that didn't want to be the leader.
Right, but he was chosen as the leader.
He's the chosen one.
He was chosen, right. So he was chosen to lead this fight, as the story goes, and he was the general, if you might want to say it like that. And everybody else that was in the battle, they were like the privates. So he was like the leader of the battle, overseeing everything, and had to keep his hands up in the air in order to win the battle. And of course, battles take a long time, and I would imagine that he did get tired. So he had his brother Aaron there, and he had a friend, her, I guess it was, to help. Mm-hmm. So they were there to support him. And the first thing they did is they brought him a big rock to sit on. It's like, you must be tired, so here, have a seat. So they provided a resource to him to make his job a little bit easier. But then as the battle went on, his arms were so heavy, and that's when they each took one of Moses's hands and held them up until the end of the battle. So this shows us that this particular scenario is a lot like a caregiver in battle, and someone who has to endure, but they get tired, right? And look what happens. Oh, yeah. People come to their aid. And I think it's really interesting that you're making this analogy, because the first thing that Aaron and Hur do is they bring a stone, a big rock for him to sit on. And I consider that a resource. So if someone today was struggling, maybe a person might provide them a resource. Here's a book to read about Alzheimer's, or here is some information on a support group you might want to go to. So that would be a resource given to them. But what you're pointing out here in the story is that they went a step further. They actually became hands-on. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They, and see the incrementalness of that. It started with a rock to sit on, and then it became hands-on. Mm-hmm. And I think as caregivers, we fail to realize that we there is help available, and it's okay to ask for it. And for me, it's very powerful to even revisit this now. I mean, this is the street fight of his life. Okay, this is the battle. I mean, this is the staff that's been given to you. You may not feel like you're up to it. In fact, what caregiver feels like they can do it. Really, it's not something we feel like we can do. But because of the support that's there that he took, he allowed himself to sit down. He allowed them to hold his arms up. Of course, part of that allowing is he realized that his arms were starting to fail. He could feel the flagging of it. And I think so often we as caregivers fail to reach out for help until it becomes, we've almost lost the battle.
Right.
And this battle can go a lot of ways with dementia. We know that there's not a cure, but it can be done gracefully, or it can be very painful, very crisis management, and so there's that incrementalness, I think, that's important to look at in the story as well.
Right. And of course, we're not going to win the battle of caregiving, because right now there is no cure. There's hope.
Exactly.
There's a lot of research going on, but right now, as we speak, there is no cure. So we're not going to, win the war, so to speak. But every day is a battle in the life of a caregiver. So they're going to win some of the battles by having the right resources and having the right team, as with Moses and his team there with him on top of the hill. So I think there's a very good story here to relate to, a biblical story that, we can share with people that, look, Moses as a leader needed help and he accepted the help. And that's a good piece of advice for caregivers too. So I like that story a lot. There are many, many other stories in the Old Testament that we could talk about also, but I'm going to switch now to some of the other ones that are my favorites also in the New Testament. And I want to talk about the book, in the book of Luke, Luke 10, chapter 10, verse 38, where the story goes with Martha and Mary. So set the story up for us, would you please, Dr. Kate?
Well, Jesus and his disciples are on their way into the village, and Martha, very hospitably, invites them to come into their home. Her sister Mary was there as well. Now, Martha is beautifully named because I always think of Martha Stewart.
So she's the hostess with the mostest.
She's the hostess with the mostest, and she's got, holy heck, I've got it's almost like Elvis is in the house, only it's Jesus and his disciples. And you think about it, that's like probably 13 people if they were all with him. We don't get a head count, but that's a lot of people. So she spends all her time prepping, but her probably younger sister would be my guess when you look at birth order and how people respond to things. Her younger sister simply sits at the feet of Jesus and listens to his words and kind of, just is it present in the moment.
So, but Martha gets angry because Mary's not helping her with the preparations, with the meal and getting the house ready to receive all of these house guests. So she runs out and says to Jesus, "Hey, I'm not getting any help. I'm doing this all by myself. Tell Mary to come help me." So then what happens?
And Jesus says, "Martha, Martha, you're worrying about too many things. There's very little that needs to be done, and Mary is doing it. She's being present in this moment. Don't take that away from her. She's chosen the better thing," which had to have hurt for Martha, but she was like just trying to do it right, darn it.
So Jesus admonished Martha, "Hey, I understand this is the kind of person you are," and he wasn't really angry at Martha, but he was telling her, "You worry too much, and this is just your personality, but this is, Mary is doing the best thing." And not that Martha was doing anything wrong, but Jesus said Mary was doing the best thing by being there. So how can we relate this story to caregivers?
The first thing that comes to mind is the whole idea of choose your battles. I can't tell you how many people are very upset because of the shower battle, the battle of the shower. I can't get him to get into the shower. And there is some validity to that argument, but at the same time, there's no rule that says you have to be X number of times standing under running water of a certain temperature with a certain kind of shampoo. There really aren't rules on that. There are other ways to accomplish that, but sometimes we get so into the preparation or that particular, like choose your battles comes to mind. Like, is that as important as what this could be? What is the most important thing? The most important thing is that there are critical areas of your body that exude sweat that make you stink. That's kind of the important part. And then there's your hair. But we get so caught up in the entire thing. It'd be like if Martha today were hosting, she could either be the Martha Stewart or she could, call out for a pizza and then just enjoy her company. And
Okay.
most of us don't think that Elvis wants a pizza. We're too busy, putting together the absolute best in meals.
So,
And it's,
yeah. So, would you say that a lot of caregivers today might be like Martha because they're perfectionistic and they're trying to make everything right or do it right, or everything has to be a certain way and they're trying to control the situation, as opposed to
absolutely.
being more like Mary, being present in the moment and being with that person that is there with you and enjoying their company and relating to them? Is that a good way to say it?
Yes, and that's kind of the role of a coach, or somebody like at Arden Courts that is coaching someone along. The role is to say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but that's maybe beyond the capabilities. But how could we accomplish this without all that? Or how could we just embrace it? How sweet it was that you just held hands. Look at the simple things.
Right, because I think
so tied up in the details.
right, the caregivers get really overwhelmed and frustrated because they don't have time to do everything. They want to do what they think they're supposed to. A lot of times they feel guilty if they're not doing everything just perfect or just right, and it really does frustrate them. So the story here tells us to keep it simple and enjoy your company or enjoy whoever is with you at the time, and not worry so much about maybe putting on airs or a show, or it doesn't have to always be perfect, that it'll get done. In other words, it'll get done. It might not be perfect, but in other words, the food would be there, the food would be eaten. It doesn't have to be all laid out perfectly. She just had to have a place for them to lay their head and food for them to eat. So simple. And then enjoy the rest of your time. I think that's a great analogy for caregivers today.
Yes, absolutely. Because these are precious moments, and when we're standing at a graveside or a memorial service, it's not going to matter how many times that person stood under a shower. That's not going to be what's important. What's going to be important is that trip you didn't take, or that walk you didn't take, or the time that you didn't take the time to give a hug. That's what's important.
Exactly. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, there'll be more biblical stories relating to caregiving and how the church can help. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478 888-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community, for making this show possible. Arden Courts is a leader in memory care, all forms of dementia, and they help the caregiver too. And one way they do that is by offering resources. And today they'd like to offer to you, the family caregiver, this free book. It's called the 36-Hour Day book, written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mace. It is full of information, tips, techniques, everything that you may have had a question about. It's probably in this book. And it's free just for the asking, and all you have to do is call the toll-free number of Arden Courts, tell them you heard about the offer on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and they'll make sure that they get your name and address and mail it right to you. So just give them a call today at 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410, and get your free copy of the 36-Hour Day. You'll be glad that you did. So my guest today is Dr. Kate McCarty, and we're talking about one of her books called Graceful Alzheimer's Care, Church's Call to Action. And we're talking about how Bible stories can relate today to what caregivers are going through in their struggles. And of course, human existence, there's always a struggle, whatever it might be. But if you're a caregiver, you're fighting a battle every day with Alzheimer's. If your person has, memory problems, whether it's Parkinson's type dementia, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, many of the other kinds, it doesn't matter. It's a battle because you're battling against this cognitive impairment and this memory loss. And so what can we learn from the Bible? What can the church learn how to apply some of these principles to caregiving, how the church can help? So Dr. Kate is with us. She is an expert when it comes to caregiving. She's a dementia coach. Been around doing this for what, Dr. Kate, about 30 years or so?
Yeah, I have. I don't even want to say how many.
Okay.
It's
and
more than 30.
Thank you for joining us via telephone from your home over in the west coast of Florida. So we've talked about a couple scenarios, one in the Old Testament, one in the New, about how these stories can relate to caregiving. Now, churches do things to help their congregation when you're talking about the sick and the elderly, because I know growing up there was there were people that went out to visit people that were sick, or people took a casserole if someone died into the home so that there would be food. And I remember that as a child, but in your book, I thought it was very interesting. You made a comment that said a casserole can only go so far. And so on that vein, there needs to be more than casseroles and a quick phone call or a quick visitation when you're talking about specifically the caregiver, right? Because we're talking about how the church and how members of the church can support caregivers that maybe no longer can go to church because they're a caregiver and can't bring their loved one. So let's talk a little bit about how you say in the book that the churches need to step it up a notch. What do you mean by that?
I guess I'm going to go for recent experience. I have a church that we work with the memory cafes that Arden Courts sponsor up here in Tampa Bay, and they have what's called a special needs minister. And that was, I think, pretty impressive because I don't see that anywhere else. And this is a young fella, but he is very intrigued about dementia. He's very supportive of, for instance, the Memory Cafe. We have had evening trainings that they have supported and rolled out the red carpets for. And ideally, it would be great if that, and actually, he was the person that let me know that one of our people was in the hospital. So he's actually, that's his role. And I don't see that, but I do see the world has a lot of special needs. The primary focus that that particular minister has is with folks with developmental disabilities, but he is also dealing with the folks that have dementia. So, there's a lot of special needs that is not fitting into our church environment, and the group itself. And what I would love to see, and I'm starting to see, like I said, that book I mentioned earlier that I haven't purchased yet, it just came out, but where they actually are, having a special service or having a special Sunday school class. Another church that's local is having a small group. It's a caregiver small group study, so that they're actually. But what the sad part about is they're not offering the respite care. Ideally, wouldn't it be great if we had a group for people with dementia? One of I think dual support groups are wonderful because then a person doesn't have to find a place for their loved one while they come and get support. They're both getting support.
Right.
And I could, that's a big opening.
Yeah, that there's such a need there for specialized ministry for not just Alzheimer's, but other types of need, also physical and mental needs. But regarding the Alzheimer's, you're talking about people that still need to be fed their spiritual life, and caregivers will suffer by not being able to get not only the spiritual information, the spiritual connection, but also the social connection, by maybe not being able to go to church and have that fellowship with their friends and other churchgoers there. So it affects the caregiver as well as it affects the person with the memory loss when church becomes more difficult because of dementia. And having a special minister to understand that and to minister to those needs is great. And I also love the idea of having not just respite so caregivers can go to church, but maybe that respite can actually become a small Sunday school class in a more simple way, something that people with dementia could actually participate in because they would be at their level. In other words, not too long, not too expansive, more simple for them
Music
to understand.
That they remember. Yeah, music is a huge one. Music that they remember. I mean, they would be happy if they came once a week and just had a hymn sing.
Yeah,
because that's how they remember it. But years ago, I've been a Sunday school teacher throughout, and we could have I hate to mention the name, David C. Cook, but we could have an actual program that was caters to folks with dementia.
Yeah, I think that
would actually have the picture, and we all have pictures that we flash back on that give us comfort.
Exactly, and I think that's
music.
Yeah,
a little bit of creativity. Why not? It would be like a faith-based memory cafe in our little world that we do over here in Arden and the Tampa Bay area. But yeah, that why not? Why not? And that I know there are people that are creative. I mean, that's how else are we fueling our Sunday schools? And who else is teaching those classes? Those same people could be doing that and feel very rewarded.
Yes. Yes.
There's a wisdom that you're never going to get out of the real fifth grader, but you will get out of a person who's staging at about the same mental level, but has the wisdom of experience that no child will have.
That's right. And I was a Sunday school teacher for little children, and when I was going through that, you had to be trained. If you had to go through a training, a church training, and be cleared, in order to be able to be around the children, of course. And that's something that people in the church can have training if they don't have experience, and they can get training lots of different ways through people like you as a dementia coach, through the Alzheimer's Association, many ways to get training on how to communicate with people with dementia, and also how to deal with some of the behaviors that might evolve. So, people can get trained. There's no lack of training out there for that. I think it's more of an initiative, and I just have to say that people are pushing for this. I do a lot of traveling with going out and talking to caregivers and talking to healthcare professionals in the healthcare world that deal with dementia. And just not very long ago, I was speaking to a nurse who is a certified dementia practitioner, has tons of education, and that's what she does. And she is a Christian of faith, and she was approaching a lot of the ministers at churches trying to get this thing going, just what we're talking about. It's one of her passions, and it is very important to her. So she's been out doing talks and educating and asking ministers to start some type of program like this in the churches. And she got a little bit of flack back from one of the ministers, and I don't know whether he was trying to find excuses not to do it, or perhaps he was worried about his time. But when she brought up the subject and asked about doing it, he said to her, "Oh, you want me to preach or minister to just one person? Because maybe only one person could come, or maybe they only had, at that time, one person in the congregation." Whatever the reason is, he felt that it was an obstacle for him. And I love, though, what she said, which, again, you're going to love this too, because in your book you have the stories, the biblical stories that can relate to caregiving today. And she said right back to this minister, "Hey, you remember the woman at the well? The woman was at the well. Jesus approached. She was the only one there, and Jesus ministered to her. And then she was so enlightened, and she went back and told other people. And because she told other people, they came. They also got ministered to. And I think there's a big lesson here is, yes, if it's one person, you start with one person, but it will grow because word of mouth and people talking about this particular service that we have for caregivers and for people with dementia, it's going to grow because there's a need for it and caregivers need it. And so I wanted to share that story with you because I thought how appropriate it was for her to remind this pastor that, hey, Jesus, one person or a crowd of 10,000, it doesn't matter.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so true.
Yes.
And that was beautiful to meet him with the scripture,
Yes. So he understood. I think he got it at that time, and that's why I love your 14-point guide here, 14 weeks to learn how to minister to caregivers through the church. And so when you're talking about stepping it up, we're talking about doing these kinds of things because, people do go out and do visits to the frail, but if people that are doing the visiting had more education, perhaps, about dementia, how would that be enhanced? How would the visit be enhanced if the people that went out to visit understood more about dementia when they were visiting a shut-in and a caregiver? How would that be different?
Oh, it would be huge. I just spoke with someone recently who the feedback was she has good days and she has bad days. And what the person didn't realize was that what was going on at that moment when she walked into the house was fairly irrelevant. But what she brought to the table could have changed a bad day into a good day. So an example is they're bringing in a casserole. This person's way far along, probably like hospice appropriate at this point as far as staging goes. But this is a person that was one of the pillars of the church. And so, first question is, do you sing when you go? Oh, no, it never occurred to me to sing. Do I need to take the hymnals? Probably not. How about Jesus Loves Me? that can change the entire demeanor of that visit. So a bad day becomes a good day just like that. And then think about how that then spreads, because the caregiver, who's 24/7 because he won't let her out of his sight and doesn't trust anybody, and he knows that Jesus loves me, can sweeten up a moment, and then he can use it. So and the beautiful thing is when it's somebody from the church meeting someone from the church, then you don't have to search for what the magic is. You just have to go back to that childhood time period and those simple things. Amazing grace. Jesus loves me. We're not talking 5 verses. We're just talking 1 verse. Repeat it. We're talking really, if it's someone who's agnostic or atheist, you might find, and this goes back to feathering your nest, that just bringing flowers or bringing something from their past makes a difference.
Right.
So we really do, they are going back in time with their abilities to process things, and we too, as a church, can use that effectively. Everybody, I train people in Kate training, and I use the story of David and Goliath, and I have 100% never met someone who didn't know that story.
Right.
And I don't take a poll on whether they're Christian or not. They all know the story of David and Goliath.
Right.
It's a given.
Right. The slingshot, and he killed the giant with a stone.
Had 5 stones, only used 1. And in fact, I made a visit myself recently, and then a lady said to me, "Kate, do you know why he had 5 stones?" And I'm like, "Oh dear, I don't." Apparently, Goliath had 4 brothers. I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And it feeds my training, But I was like, oh my gosh. So there is a strategy for every one of the brothers, not just the one, right?
Well, the story, one of the stories is in Mark 10, Jesus and the children, where the parents are bringing the little children to greet Jesus, and some of the disciples are saying, no, get away, he's too busy, don't bother him. And Jesus basically said, no, let the children come. And you're relating that, you just said it a second ago, simple, childlike. Not that people with dementia are children. They're not. They're adults. But they become childlike, not only sometimes in their behavior because of the dementia, but also because they remember the things that they first learned longer than the things that they learned later. So the information that they have in their brain is lost in most recent years, but they still do remember those old hymns and those Bible verses and John 3:16, which we all learned in Vacation Bible School.
Yes.
And all of these things, right? All of these things. So we can take, that story and relate it to today, that Jesus wasn't going to sit there and, give the sermon or give a sermon to the children. He just wanted to hug them and he wanted to bless them. And I think that's another great story that people in the church can relate to, because sometimes if you don't know what to say when you're with a caregiver, or you're near someone with dementia and you just don't know what to say or do, what's wrong with giving a hug? Put your arm around them, show that you care.
Open up your arms, and get a read whether they, show that you care. That's exactly it. And I think about we have one little church that we go to, and they have a crying room, and I'm like, we could rename that. We could call that a room that's for people who got bored with the sermon. I have a classic story of a fellow with frontal temporal dementia yelling at the pastor, "Too long."
Well, there you go. It could be a room for caregivers to go in with their loved one who maybe have a little bit of attention deficit, because it is hard for someone with dementia to focus for a long time, and some of those sermons are long for people that don't have dementia. So that could be a room with
candy or whatever, just like we did with the kids.
Exactly, and they can go to that room and still hear the sermon, but not have to be still and quiet, and that would go a long way also to help the caregiver, so they're not missing out, and they have a way to help their loved one not to disrupt the rest of the people, but still they're all getting the benefit of the church-going experience, I guess I would say. Real quick,
Absolutely.
3 components. You talk about 3 components in your book for the church in order to take action. One, the first one is prayer. There's the 3 P's. The first one is prayer, and I think that's pretty self-explanatory that this is something that churches need to pray about, right? To take on
Oh, for
and
sure.
pray about what their needs might be. But then you have one, the second one is called the presence, mindful and physical. Talk about presence. First there's prayer, then there's presence.
Um,
Being present, I
but
guess.
yes, rather than having those people become peripheral, reaching that, the non-physical arm out and keeping them close comes to mind. When you see someone who's no longer coming to church and they still look healthy, that's part of our problem, I think, with the dementia world. They don't look like they're not a cancer patient. They're not going to be gone quickly. It could be 5 or 10 years that they're out of the church.
Right.
We need to continue to be present to them. And that means we have to adapt to what they need. So I think that's so missing, because out of sight, out of mind, you quit coming. I might check on you once a month. But that's a really diligent church, to keep that presence. It goes back to Mary. Is anybody sitting at the person's feet? Is anybody meeting them where they're at?
Exactly.
Are we still carrying on
Meeting.
as if all that's normal?
I like that, meeting them where they're at and listening. And a big part of presence is listening what their needs are. How can we help you? And, find out what their needs are. And then the third P that you mentioned is practice and putting it into practice. What
Yes.
are some of the other ideas that, churches could do besides taking a casserole and maybe doing a visitation, maybe step up the phone call like you just said.
Yes, maybe a telephone line that's, and what I'm finding in our little memory cafe family, because it's about 3 years we've been doing this, I'm finding that, the widow of the person who had dementia is so valuable to the group, because she's been there and she survived, and she can share her strength, and she can share support, and she is so wired to understand. So those are the people, people who have survived the Alzheimer's process.
That's
They
right.
could be doing the telephone line, or maybe it's an internet chain, but just a regular check-in, a venting session.
Right.
I'm here for you.
That's right. And that would help that widow too, so she wouldn't be lonely now that she has lost her spouse. It would serve dual
That's her purpose.
purposes.
Yes.
Yes.
It's so encompassing that they're lost. They don't know what to do next, because their whole life has been caregiving.
Right. So that would help both parties. And I do want to say that though there are a lot of churches that do have support groups for caregivers, and a lot of churches that do have telephone reach out. But I think what we're talking about here today is there's not enough. There's not enough, and we need more in more places, and we need more help within the church to reach out, because we do have resources in the community, but I think we could almost have those faith-based resources within the churches too, to complete the whole picture, if you will. And this is what we're talking about today. So we really want to encourage anyone that's part of a congregation that's heard this broadcast today, or if you'd like to get this book. Dr. Kate, how could somebody get the book that we're talking about today?
It's available on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And you just look up Graceful Alzheimer's, and that usually pops it up.
Good. Graceful Alzheimer's Care, Church's Call to Action. If you're a church member and you're interested in starting a program like this or something similar to help caregivers regarding dementia or caregivers in general, get the book. It's really, really good. It's very helpful. Share it with some other people in the church. Dr. Kate, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your expertise and talking about church and caregiving.
Thank you. It was an honor. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, if you would like to touch base with Dr. Kate, you can do that at katemccarty@gmail.com. And Kate is with a C, CateMcCarty at gmail.com. Email her. She'll be glad to email you back with any other tips or information. Go to Amazon, get the book. It's an easy read. It's really interesting. I think that we need to talk about this more, and I appreciate the topic, Dr. Kate, and I appreciate everything that you do for caregivers. And I guess the last word would be what is the thing that you tell caregivers all the time? Don't wait for a crisis?
Yes, don't wait for a crisis. If you're questioning.
Yeah, if you're questioning, it's time to do something about it. So
Do it, yes.
That's right. Well, don't wait, everybody. Don't wait for a crisis. Get your books. Call Art and Courts. Get your 36-hour day. Get Dr. Kate's book. We will be back next week with more Caregiver Solutions info show. And until then, don't forget, give somebody a hug because they need it and so do you. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.